everybody, I hope you're all well. What are we all thinking? Obviously it's a work in progress because I moved not that long ago, so we need to build up the background a little bit, but OG jordantheresa stans will remember this lamp. Leave a comment if you remember the lamp. If anyone has any cute shops to recommend getting like little decor and trinkety things from, let me know. If you have a small business yourself, please let me know because I am looking to buy things to decorate my flat. But yes, I know that this doesn't look sort of like as aesthetically pleasing as my last background, but number one, I am so comfortable. In my last setup, I was not comfortable at all. I was actually sat on like the most uncomfy sofa, like sat up like this, trying to make my posture look good. And it just wasn't a fun time. Like, you know, it's an underrated feeling being comfortable. That was like the least groundbreaking statement ever, guys. Underrated feeling. Comfort. And I also got a new light, so my last light wasn't adjustable, so I no longer feel like I'm staring into the eyes of God whenever I'm filming a video now. But let's actually get into today's video. The term it girl has been ever present in pop culture and the fashion industry for decades, over 100 years in fact. And despite its lasting legacy, a lot of people are beginning to argue that there are no it girls anymore, especially with social media and influencers coming into play. I mean, I think we've all seen that TikTok audio which goes, they use the term it girl. What do you think? Evil is coming and she's evil. Most definitely. Yeah, no, I can't put it in because of YouTube's copyright rules, but yeah. So I wanted to explore all of this today, and I wanted to explore origins of the term, a timeline for the it girl, how social media has impacted the it girl, and whether there are any it girls anymore. Firstly, I wanted to discuss what an it girl even is. And I think what's quite funny about this is the term it girl is inherently indefinable. We often hear people describing female celebrities, models, actresses, and even influencers as having it. But what even is it? Obviously, I'm not going to be able to properly nail it down and define it, but I feel like if we sort of explore the origins of the term together, all the different definitions, maybe we can get to some kind of answer. Maybe we can get from A to B. The first definition I found of it girl is an attractive young woman who is perceived to have both sex appeal and a personality that is especially engaging. The Oxford Dictionary actually has both an American definition, a glamorous, vivacious, or sexually attractive actress, model, etc., and a British definition, a young, rich woman who has achieved celebrity because of her socialite lifestyle. As you guys can probably tell, the American definition very much centers sex appeal, meanwhile the British definition centers wealth and riches. One of the earliest literary usages you can find of the term actually dates back all the way to 1904 in one of Rudyard Kipling's short stories, which reads, "'Tisn't beauty, so to speak, nor good talk necessarily. It's just it. Some women will stay in a man's memory if they once walk down a street." But the term was actually popularized after the release of the 1927 movie It, starring Claire Bow. Eleanor Glyn, who wrote the book which the movie was based on and the screenplay, has said, "With it, you win all men if you are a woman and all women if you are a man. It can be a quality of the mind as well as physical attraction." Claire Bow's character in It is described as a mix of an ingenue, an innocent or unsophisticated young woman, and a femme fatale, an attractive and seductive young woman, especially one who is likely to cause distress or disaster to a man who becomes involved with her. And Claire Bow's rival in the movie, although she was also young and attractive, didn't have it. Funnily enough, Eleanor Glyn's sister, Lucy Lady Duff Gordon, also known as Lucille, actually popularized the term in the fashion industry. Lucille was a fashion designer who made lingerie and lingerie-inspired clothing. She owned multiple boutiques all around the world and was actually one of the first ever fashion designers to present her clothing on a stage, accompanied with music, which we now know as a runway show. Lucille's use of the term can actually be dated back all the way to 1917 in her fashion column for Harper's Bazaar, which reads, "I saw a very ladylike and well-bred friend of mine in her newest Parisian frock. She felt like she was it, and perfectly happy." Of course, throughout history, the way people use the term it girl has changed throughout the years, and wealth has always remained a consistent factor in being an it girl, but especially when it came to the 1980s and especially the early 2000s, wealth became a huge component. In the early 2000s, it girls were thought of as wealthy, attractive, unemployed women who were often photographed by the paparazzi, going to parties and hanging out with their friends, and were often almost dismissed in a way as famous for being famous. The term it girl has always been popular, but I especially find in the last 10 years there's been a real positive resurgence of the term, especially with the rise of social media. So much so, in fact, that there's actually now the it girl aesthetic, but I am going to be circling back to this later. I read an article in Savoir Faire called "What Makes an It Girl an It Girl?" and I feel like it perfectly defines the modern day it girl. Our attempt to define an it girl is ironic given that she is inherently indefinable, imbued with a nameless sort of magnetism or je ne sais quoi. That draws people to her presence. To put it simply, an it girl is someone that everyone wants to be. And why does everybody want to be an it girl? Well, seemingly an it girl has it all. She's beautiful, she's wealthy, she has men falling at her feet, she has a large circle, she has a really fun, exciting and interesting life, which so many people want for themselves. And beauty has always and will always be currency, especially with social media. People can build a huge following and make a lot of money just because they're beautiful. Because the term it girl has been popularized ever since the beginning of the 1900s, I thought to better illustrate and help us figure out what an it girl is, I would make a little timeline of it girls, starting all the way back at the beginning of the 20th century with Evelyn Nesbit. Born in 1884, Evelyn was a chorus girl and a model. She posed for magazines, newspapers, souvenir items, and calendars, and was actually at the center of a court case when her husband, Harry Thorpe, shot and killed Stanford White, who was a very wealthy man who took an interest in Evelyn. The it girls of the 1920s and 30s, as I mentioned earlier, Claire Bow, who was the leading lady in the movie It, and Jean Harlow. They were both well-known and loved American actresses and sex symbols. In fact, Claire Bow was so well-loved that she received over 45,000 fan letters in just 1 month. Between the 1940s and the 1960s, just a handful of notable it girls were Katharine Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, and Audrey Hepburn. All very famous American actresses. At one point, Elizabeth Taylor was the highest paid actress in the world, and all of these women have stayed culturally relevant to this day over 60 years later. Farrah Fawcett, Grace Jones, Iman, and Brooke Shields were all it girls of the 70s and 80s. It was around this time that being an it girl didn't solely rely on being a sex symbol. Of course, all of these women who I just mentioned are very beautiful and sexy. They were all very accomplished models and actresses. They weren't just known for being sex symbols. But it girls of the past like Marilyn Monroe and Jean Harlow, who of course both of them were incredibly talented and multifaceted women, were often exploited by Hollywood and the film industry because they were sexy women. During the 90s came a real insurgence of supermodel it girls. Naomi Campbell, Kate Moss, Cindy Crawford. All three of these women were effortlessly beautiful, were very hard-working models, and had a captivating energy on the runway, which still to this day is very hard to replicate. You often hear people arguing that they do not make supermodels how they used to. Chloe Sevigny was dubbed another it girl of the 90s, and she was actually discovered by a journalist who wrote an article about her and her style for The New Yorker. As soon as the words early 2000s it girl leave my mouth, I'm sure the same 3 or 4 names pop into everyone's heads. Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, Nicole Richie, and of course Paris Hilton. All of these women are very accomplished. Lindsay Lohan was the actress of the early 2000s and was in literally all of my favorite childhood movies. Britney Spears, a literal superstar. And Nicole and Paris Hilton were both reality stars who had a huge influence in the fashion industry. But because of rampant misogyny in the tabloids at the time, a lot of these women were literally just described as party girl bimbos, especially Nicole and Paris, who were often described as not having jobs and, again, as I mentioned earlier, famous for being famous. The 2020s is when things get a little bit murky when it comes to defining it girls of the decade because of the rise of social media and how much it's transformed celebrity culture. So before we talk about how social media has changed the it girl, let's name some 2020 it girls. I actually searched up it girl on TikTok to sort of get a better idea of who the 2020 it girls are, and so many different names came up, such as Bella Hadid, Lily Rose Depp, Zendaya, Alexa Demi, Rihanna, Cindy Kimberly, Lana Del Rey, SZA, Jennie Kim, Lori Harvey, Jenny Ortega, Emma Chamberlain, Zoe Kravitz, Madison Beer, Keke Palmer, Bimini Bon Boulage, Doja Cat, Chloe Cherry, Rachel Sennett, and Lourdes Leon. As you guys can probably tell, social media has blown this thing wide open because now everyone has the accessibility to be able to name whoever they like an it girl. It's no longer up to journalists and tabloids. Hence why in the 1930s there was about 3 defining it girls, and then in the 2020s I just listed off 20 different names. And that's not even all the names I saw in the it girl hashtag. Not only can people proclaim anyone as an it girl with the power of just a TikTok account, but also anyone can become an it girl with the power of social media. Some really popular social media it girls being Emma Chamberlain, Best Dressed, Iris Law, Cindy Kimberly, Matilda Jaff, Lila Moss, Olivia Neal, Mia Regan, and Addison Rae. And just to veer off a little bit, something which I find really interesting about social media it girls versus celebrity it girls is that a huge part of social media success is being relatable. It doesn't always matter, especially with male influencers, a la Jake and Logan Paul, but even the more unrelatable influencers who like to flaunt their wealth, like Tana Mojo, started off as relatable YouTubers. Tana Mojo used to film storytime videos on her bedroom floor. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of people like certain influencers and follow certain influencers because they find them relatable. But an inherent characteristic of being an it girl is that you're unrelatable. You're someone that everyone wants to be but can't. So it's really interesting to see social media it girls like Emma Chamberlain doing really exciting, major celebrity things like going to the Met Gala, but also still having to maintain her relatability so people like her online. A lot of people argue that one of the key traits of being an it girl is that they aren't trying to be an it girl. They effortlessly draw everyone's attention. Paparazzi snaps pictures of them and the tabloids publish them and logs all of their activities in tabloids. But social media has completely changed this. Influencers snap pictures of themselves. They log all of their activities on Instagram or TikTok. Influencers are actively trying to gain attention and followers because they want to reap all of the socio-economic benefits which come with being an influencer and an it girl. And one of the key parts of being an it girl is that you have influence. It is influence. And in this social media economy, influence is not only social capital, but it's real capital. Something which is so important about being an it girl is that she is flawed. Specifically referring to 2000s it girls, something which captivates us so much and draws our attention so much is their lifestyle. Whether it's partying, their relationships, their freshie menships, their messy friendships, we are hooked and we want to know more. There is something just so iconic about all of their post-club paparazzi photos getting into taxis, and Kim Kardashian talking so brazenly about how she was high when she got married.
I got married on ecstasy. I had no idea.
But as an influencer, you are expected to be perfect at all times, and there isn't really that room for messiness. Like Emma Chamberlain can't go out and get super drunk and embarrass herself in a nightclub in case case someone is filming her. Influencers can't get into fights with their friends anymore without the internet taking sides and deeming one as the victim and the other as problematic who you shouldn't support anymore. I know about you guys, but I remember when Tammy Hembrow had a little bit too much to drink at Kylie Jenner's 21st birthday party and was photographed being carried out face down on a stretcher. And she got so much backlash and abuse for this that she had to put out an apology video for getting too drunk at a birthday party. Like, sorry, haven't we all been there? Haven't we all been there at least once? And I understand that both Paris and Nicole were berated a lot by the tabloids and the public for their messy partying habits, don't get me wrong, but it's the same people that are complaining that we don't have it girls like 2000s it girls that are sending Tammy Hembrow abuse for getting paralytic at a party. Social media culture is very black or white, good or bad, problematic or unproblematic, and something which makes an it girl is that her lifestyle is very transfixing. Upon first glance, it seems like she doesn't care what people think about her, and they live life seemingly without consequence, which is what makes them so fascinating, which is what makes us want to live vicariously through them. Meanwhile, now, influencers almost have complete control of their own persona and how the public sees them. So if they want to, they can craft themselves to be unattainable and perfect. And a lot of people would argue that a modern day it girl nowadays is a lot less about someone who is living a lavish life without consequence and more about someone who has a perfect image. Now, this is just one side of the argument. This is just one side of people who believe that we will never have any it girls anymore because of social media. There will never be another Paris or another Nicole, but there is another side to this. Although I do agree with a lot of the points, I think the idea that Paris Hilton became an it girl on accident is naive to say the least. In her recent documentary, This Is Paris, she reveals that her dumb blonde persona was exactly that, a persona. I'm sure Paris enjoyed the partying and that sort of messy part of her lifestyle, but her becoming a 2000s it girl was a lot more intentional than people used to give her credit for. Thanks to her infamy in the early 2000s, her perfume collection has made over $2.5 billion. She has 19 different product lines, has more than 45 branded retail locations in the Middle East and Asia, and is reportedly the highest paid female DJ in the world, making $1 million for a single gig. I definitely think the widespread availability and accessibility of social media has broken the it girl a little bit. Like, it's broken it open a little bit. Like, it's a bit harder nowadays to differentiate who is an it girl and who isn't, especially because it's very much up for interpretation. And it is a bit easier to become an it girl now than it was 20 years ago. But I think the idea that if you are beautiful, wealthy, and have famous parents, that with just the power of Instagram, you'll become an it girl is kind of untrue. One shining example of this being Nicola Peltz and Brooklyn Beckham. Oh, I've been waiting to talk about them. I don't think, I'm going off script here, I do not think I have disliked a nepotism baby more than I dislike Brooklyn Beckham. I have never seen so much money funneled into mediocrity before in my life. On paper, they seem like the next power couple. Nicola Peltz is extremely beautiful and comes from a billionaire family. Brooklyn Beckham is the child of Victoria and David Beckham, who are both very well liked. But Nicola and Brooklyn just fall flat.
Fun fact about Brooklyn, he loves labels like in your clothes. And so last year for Christmas, I had a suitcase full of them customized for him.
They're not very charismatic, they aren't very likable either, but more importantly, their PR team is doing absolute overtime because I cannot escape them. I can't escape their boring interviews. And this circles back to our point of not being able to manufacture an it girl. Of course, being beautiful and wealthy helps. Having rich and famous parents definitely helps. But you also still need to have a certain quality, a certain certain je ne sais quoi to become an it girl. And because social media is becoming more and more saturated with influencers, you do actually have to do a lot to stand out from the crowd. The social media landscape has changed a lot in the past 5 years, and you can no longer rely on outer appearances and taking pictures to catapult yourself into it girl fame. You also have to carry yourself with personality and charisma, especially with apps like TikTok being extremely popular now. Image is no longer enough. I especially think in the last couple of years there has been more of a growing disdain towards wealth and aristocracy and nepotism, that when we see mediocre nepotism babies like Nicola Peltz and Brooklyn Beckham, it actually gets on everyone's nerves because they've been given all of these opportunities to succeed, and it just feels so unfair. Versus when you actually find a really likable nepotism baby like Iris Law, who clearly has a really good eye for fashion, you can see how important charisma, talent, and personality become. Charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. Also, if any of you guys want a video about nepotism babies, specifically mediocre nepotism babies, please let me know. Something which is really interesting, which I've noticed whilst researching for this video, is the it girl aesthetic and how to be an it girl guides being really popular on TikTok. It's not surprising at all that the it girl has been turned into an aesthetic. You know what TikTok aesthetics I've seen recently? Ballet sleaze and the frazzled English woman aesthetic. What are we even talking about anymore? But also, maybe we should explore the aesthetification of the it girl. That was the most insufferable sentence that's ever left my mouth. So one thing I discovered whilst researching into the it girl aesthetic is that there's actually different branches. So for example, the coquette it girl, the YSL it girl, the French it girl, the gym it girl, the old money it girl, the NYC it girl, the London it girl. I feel really old. I'm decaying. And then I realized that the term it girl can basically be applied to any already existing internet aesthetic. So it girl is being used quite liberally. And as I said earlier, a lot of people argue that this is leading to the death of the it girl, because if everyone's an it girl, then no one's an it girl. But I do also want to make it very clear that social media users are not the only people that have overused the term it girl. All of the tabloids and magazines in the 2000s and the 2010s, the term it girl was used literally all the time to describe any up and coming fashionista, fashion celebrity, style icon. And it's not even necessarily because everyone was killing the fashion game in 2010. It was literally just laziness. When it comes to it girl guides on TikTok, a lot of them are very similar. So there's some very basic advice like have a signature makeup look / do clean girl makeup, dress well, have a signature scent. But also some of the it girl advice can actually run quite deep. And there's also a lot of lifestyle it girl advice as well, like eat a healthy breakfast, work out, walk everywhere, make to-do lists. And a lot of these it girl guides started to remind me of that girl. And I even found one TikTok which was titled How to Be That It Girl. And I've actually already spoken about the that girl trend, so I'm not going to get too into it in today's video, but I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing tips on how to live a healthier lifestyle. And if the more aesthetic side of things motivates you more, then all power to you. But I definitely think it's worth asking ourselves if we want to follow an it girl guide because we want to live a healthier, more productive lifestyle, or whether we just want to be beautiful and wealthy and have lots of friends. But it's really interesting that there's been this really recent positive resurgence of the term, especially relating to young women and young girls. And I think a lot of young girls especially really connect with the it girl aesthetic because you are allowed to be unapologetically feminine, which throughout our lives women are very often mocked for. This has been discussed 1,000 times before, so I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but being feminine and having more girly interests like fashion and makeup are really embraced and praised in sort of the it girl aesthetic. Staying on the fact that the typical it girl is very feminine, the problems already sort of start to arise a little bit and become a bit clearer. Some people find the term it girl to be quite empowering because it can only really be applied to women. Of course, terms like it boy and it man still exist, but they have have not had anywhere near the same lasting power as It Girl. But if you just look at TikTok's most popular It Girls, such as Bella Hadid and Lily Rose Depp, you very much have to fit into a very, very patriarchal standard of beauty to even be considered an It Girl. Like when I was, oh my god guys, when I was scrolling through hashtag It Girl on TikTok, I literally wanted to rip my face off. And let's not pretend that more masculine presenting women and women with more masculine interests have been given an easier ride. Feminine women get much less of a tougher time than masculine women do from men, and masculine women don't typically fit into patriarchal standards of beauty, and you have to fit into patriarchal standards of beauty to be considered an It Girl. Also, I noticed while scrolling on TikTok that non-white women are often left out of being an It Girl. I saw Lily Rose Depp's name pop up way more than Zendaya, Naomi Campbell, Rihanna, who are easily far more accomplished than Lily Rose Depp. Being an It Girl and the idea of it possibly being empowering to women reminds me a lot of girl boss feminism, in the fact that it's only empowering for a very, very few amount of women, beautiful and wealthy women. To finish off this video, I thought I would talk about what happens to It Girls. Many It Girls of the past, like Paris Hilton, Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, Grace Jones, remain cultural icons and almost become like representatives of the decade. Like when I think of the 1950s, I think of Marilyn Monroe. It's really interesting that It Girls tend to change every decade. And I know that a lot of it relates to, you know, changing trends, but also I think a lot of it links to youth and beauty. You can only really be an It Girl if you are young and beautiful. Like to so many people, you basically become frozen in time in your prime years and sort of at the height of your career. Unfortunately, some of the It Girls who were exploited and abused whilst they were alive, like Marilyn Monroe, continue to be exploited after their deaths. Cough, cough, blonde, cough, cough. When it comes to social media It Girls, I recently watched a really interesting video from Nicole Raffi titled, "Why Do It Girls Quit?" So I'll leave it down below, make sure you guys go check it out. Nicole raises some really interesting points about this almost newfound phenomenon of social media It Girls taking really long breaks from social media or just quitting altogether. Something which seems really inevitable with any social media influencer, It Girl or not, is that audiences only let influencers succeed so much before they have to drag them back down. When an influencer is universally loved, it's only a matter of time before people begin to dislike them. Emma Chamberlain, throughout her entire career, has gone from being loved, hated, loved again, then hated again. About the time that Best Dressed hit 1 million subscribers, there were videos coming out about her deeming her problematic, and I never watched Best Dressed, nor did I watch any of these videos. Best Dressed being problematic or not aside, there's nothing wrong with being critical of influencers or internet figures, but we need to recognize that there is a pattern with female influencers specifically, where they basically get shot down when they start becoming too successful. And when it comes to influencers taking breaks or quitting, I think the relationship we have with influencers is so drastically different. Sorry, I don't know why I paused. Dramatic pause. It's so drastically different from the relationship that we used to have with celebrities. Of course, celebrities of the past had to deal with hordes and hordes of fans. I mean, Claire Bow received 45,000 fan letters in 1 month, for crying out loud. But I think because of social media, we have a far closer proximity to influencers than we have with any celebrity of the past. And because of that, we can build a real parasocial relationship with them. And it makes us feel entitled to know why they're taking a break or why they're quitting and if they ever plan on coming back. And of course, it can be really upsetting when your favorite YouTuber quits YouTube. I'd be devastated if some of my favorite creators quit YouTube. But I actually really like the fact that a lot of influencers are taking control and are putting themselves and their mental health first. What I spoke about earlier with the difference of social media It Girls and celebrity It Girls is that celebrities were constantly surveilled by the paparazzi. Meanwhile, influencers basically do it themselves and they can control what kind of image they're putting out there. Celebrities like Britney Spears were terrorized by the paparazzi for years, didn't have a choice to put an end to the constant intrusive surveillance which they were experiencing. Meanwhile, influencers do have that choice and they do have that control, and we should really be supportive in them doing that. But yes, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Love to hear what you guys think. Leave a comment, and if you aren't already subscribed to my channel, subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye! Bye.